And we're live, LinkedIn. Go grab a cup of coffee. We will get started in less than a minute. All right. Good morning, LinkedIn. I'm Mike Black, and this is the Page Black Leadership Series. We're here at this time every single Thursday. And what I do is I bring in experts. I either have a panel or an individual expert, and we talk about topics or business challenges that leaders in the middle market face. And so today we're talking about revenue enablement. And I want to take you back in time. In the early 2000s, there was a new term that was brought up. It was called sales enablement. And the idea is what does sales need to close deals? Now, why would there be this new big movement? One, I think on the marketing side, there was this new idea of content marketing, and one way that content's used is during the sales process. Now, if I ask Jim, my expert later today, he's going to tell you that not all content's used, and that actually some of the content isn't really helpful in the sales process. But that said, it was a response in a change to how people buy. People had started doing more research, looking into product before they talked to a salesperson. And I'm sure if you've attended any marketing webinars, you've heard that now 75% or whatever percent that is of the sales process is done. They've already kind of researched all this before they even talk to a salesperson. But sales have become more complicated since then. And so revenue enablement's a new term. And so my goal for you is, as business leaders, what I want you to understand is this is a new shift, and it's in response, again, to changes in how people buy. One of the changes that I've noticed is that it is a broader number of people just are involved. And I think Jim can give you some data on that later. We may get into that. But the idea is I actually have a couple of deals in front of CEOs. I've got a yes from the CEO. And they said, but I need my team on board because they can't lead the initiative. And so we're now having discussions across the entire organization. So even CEOs aren't ready to close deals until they're ready and see that there's broad consensus. And that makes a lot of sense. So revenue enablement, we're going to get into what is it and why is it important. And let me go ahead and get started by introducing my guest today. I'll get that way so I can read this off. Jim Franklin. He's a senior partner and fractional CRO at GCE Strategic Consulting. Jim's a proven sales leader. He has 25 years of success building and leading B2B sales teams. He works in SaaS software and professional services. He often serves as CRO, and he's going to tell you a story today about his current engagement. He provides advisory and implementation services for B2B companies, and his goal is to help you as a business leader get predictable, repeatable, scalable, and profitable revenue. And who doesn't want all of those things? All right. My name is Mike Black. I'll pop myself back on the screen. I am there's Jim and me. Let me fix that. All right, there we go. My name is Mike Black. I'm the CEO and managing partner of Page Black, and I will go into us a little bit later. Let's move forward and just jump into our first question. And my first question is a little bit, why does it matter? So I'm going to ask you, Jim, as I pop you on the screen. First, why don't you give your definition, because this is your gig.
Yep.
What is revenue enablement? And then on top of that, why the heck does it matter?
Mike, thank you so much for that introduction. Truly appreciate it. So, the revenue enablement means a lot of things to a lot of people, but the bottom line, and you outlined it in your introduction, is how do we create a scalable, repeatable, predictable, and profitable revenue stream? So, and that's, sustainable. So I think that, my definition tends to be there are three key components of revenue enablement: sales, marketing, and customer success. And within that, there's also, it has to align with the buyer's journey, because also Mike said that buyers have changed, how they buy. The buying committees have continued to increase in size. For these larger deals, typically, we've seen them between 8 and 12, and sometimes even more, especially if it's a multiple domain, multiple business unit sale too, right? So the CEO, to Mike's point, I've seen that time and time again, that in many circumstances they are not willing to sign off on the project inherently and with them just themselves. So again, the definition is the ability to align your revenue enablement organization, again, sales, marketing, and customer success, against the way people buy, the buyer's journey and the buyer's process. Sorry, go ahead, Mike, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you a question of, I know you tend to work in SaaS, a lot of software, professional services. I think you're currently on an IT engagement, which kind of fits those. And my question would be, are there industries, is there like, maybe if it's I don't want to say e-commerce, but maybe it's a B2B e-commerce where they sell products that are kind of used in building materials, perhaps. Is revenue enablement still important for those kinds of companies?
Absolutely. So you're right. I mean, I've got more expertise in the areas that you cited, but I've also had clients in the cannabis industry, for example. So and the research industry, it really does not matter. It's B2B, right? So you have to attract your customers. You have to provide a solution to those customers if you're going to be in business, right? And then you want to maintain those customers. So it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's just a sales process for a construction materials provider is not that, at the end of the day, it's still a sales process, right? Yep. And the components are different. How do you articulate what the solution is? How do you have a question framework that you can elicit or get the buyer engaged, right? So it really doesn't matter. But to your point, all the headlines are in SaaS these days, right? But it truly doesn't matter. It really doesn't, Mike.
Yeah. So I know that. Tell me a little bit more why this is important today. I know that it's because you're going to struggle. People, if you don't really have this all in alignment, I'm sure larger companies are really focused on how can we get everything in alignment? How do we improve the customer journey? And that's going to put pressure on the middle market. And it's filtering down, is my sense on this. Is that accurate? And then why is that? Or if not, why is it important?
I think it is. I think it is accurate, right? And the alignment is a big piece of it. Culture is a big piece of it, right? But I think more importantly, the alignment, because when I talk about alignment, I mean that, for example, what you hear time and time again is, marketing is giving sales all these leads, right? And marketing is saying you're not following up on them, and sales says you're giving me all these, leads, and they're not worth that. They're not worth the darn. And then you have no accountability, right? And then you acquire the customer. And then the sales goes away because they want to focus on new business, right? So, and they're hammering on marketing to do top of funnel to get more leads in there, and then all of a sudden these customers become poor stepchilds and they go away somewhere else, right? So, you want to retain these customers. That's the customer experience piece of it. So if you've got one individual at the top, and this may sound like a little bit of self-promotion, but seriously, one individual at the top, that CRO role, right? And you have all of those three components report up to the chief revenue officer. You have one individual that's driving that entire revenue stream. So, and you can have that. You can have that at smaller companies as well. You may have director levels below that, right? But there's no reason but at a smaller company that you cannot. You really should have that CRO role, right? You don't want to. In those mid-market companies like we were talking about earlier, but just before this call, Mike, that if you have a CRO, a chief marketing officer, chief sales officer, and a chief customer experience officer, that's a very large bottom line budget, and a lot of times that they're going to be not nearly in alignment with what I've seen if you have the CRO role in there.
You're actually hinting. I'm going to do a brief commercial. This month, we're all about revenue enablement. We're getting into the different components. Jim's our first expert. Next month, we're actually going to be talking about when and how to outsource. Do you get a fractional? What does that look like? And we're going to bring in a couple of experts on fractional or outsourcing companies and do that. So thanks, Jim, for introducing my next topic. Okay. If I'm a CEO and I'm running a company, maybe it's in, let's do construction. Construction's exploding right now. There's not a construction firm out there, or in manufacturing, same thing. That if you're an American-based manufacturing company, you have a leads pipe, you can't take more business for another 6 months. Why would I want to why would I care about revenue enablement, Jim?
Well, That's an interesting scenario, Mike, because um, I find it hard to believe that nobody wants to take no new business for 6 months, right? So
No,
maybe,
we have clients that have backed off on marketing because they are so far, they're months behind in fulfilling. And so if they do a quote, they can't give a quote for another 6 months. Plus the supply chain is, and I still think there's a business case. I'm not trying to beat you up, but the supply chain is such a mess that they can't even predict their costs that far out. So at this point, they're like, look, we can help you, but it's going to be a while. So what would your thoughts to that be?
so maybe you have much more focus on the account management and the
Mhm.
customer experience level, because if you've got orders and you're not able to fulfill those orders,
That's
there's
right.
got to be an ongoing communication to your customers, right? About, why stay with you, and don't look for somebody else that can promise you to get it there sooner, right? So
Yeah.
again, you might want to, tweak the knobs a little bit down on marketing and a little bit up on account management and customer experience. So
100%. And I think the other challenge is that this too will pass. That the COVID is, we're starting
it
to come
will.
out. Supply chains are going to get ironed out. They're saying maybe, I think I read that it would be quarter three, quarter four before the things are really smooth. But at that point, now if you're booming and you're so busy you can't keep up, start looking at revenue enablement. My recommendation, whether you start with marketing or the full CRO, I get points of both, but look at that because it is a competitive advantage moving into 2023.
Yeah, because you need all the infrastructure in place, right? I mean, that might, from a marketing perspective, that might be an ideal time to work on, your ideal customer profile, work
Mm-hmm.
on your buyer personas, do a content audit, right? I mean, those all
Mm-hmm.
take time, and if your hair's not on fire, and you can do some of these fundamental infrastructure stuff. Tasks and processes too. I think that might be beneficial as well, Mike.
Yeah. So Jim, tell me what often triggers people to look at revenue enablement. What starts that conversation? What are the things that they're seeing and they're like, geez, I need to talk to somebody like Jim?
Yep. So what I say, I'm actually in a shared office space today. I'm with a new client. We're just kicking off that really the revenue enablement program over the last couple of weeks, and there's a couple of key driving factors, right? Especially for these mid-market companies, is like, okay, I realize that I've got to whatever stage I'm at, maybe 5 million or 4 million or 6 million, right? Just kind of by having a great product and having a great reputation. Well, I want to double or triple my organization. So what I need to do is I realize that to do that, I've got to have the marketing component, I've got to have the sales component, and I've got to have the CX component, right? So I need to kick off all three of those areas and have somebody in there that can do that for me, because again, if done correctly, the result is you're going to retain your customers, you're going to drive new customers, and you're going to differentiate yourself by a lot of your messaging too. So the driving factor, and that's happening here with the client I'm currently working with as well. That they're poised really to significantly expand from a revenue perspective. And there's also the component of, okay, if you want to attract some money, whether that's VC money or investment money in the different avenues, that you've really got to have your processes in place. You've got to have your infrastructure in place, and you're going to have the right people in the right seats, or at least be able to tell the story of why you can do that. So the whole revenue enablement components and processes give you that foundation and the ability to help tell that story to investors as well, Mike.
Mm. So it just makes me wonder about a question. So there's a lot of business model, like you have EOS or traction, which is kind of Gino Wickman's approach of like, here's the structure of your business. And there are a bunch out there. So it seems like revenue enablement is looking at how do you restructure the entire business to support sales. Is that fair? And would that make a shift in EOS or not so much?
That's not so much. So let's say I'm going to just use EOS. Let's say we use EOS. That provides that fundamental goals and objectives. They call them rocks, right? So
Yep.
here's my vision. Here's my rocks. And then you have to have, and to that, you also have the right people in the right seats too, right, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very
Mm-hmm.
similar for scaling up, let's face it, right? But scaling up typically is a little bit larger organization. But using the EOS model that says, okay, here's my vision, here's my goals, and then having the right people in the right seats and structuring accountability. This is such a great way to structure accountability over on that revenue side, right? You've got the revenue side, so then underneath, so no, it's not going to, no, I'm not advocating that sales is the tail wagging the dog kind of a thing, right? I'm saying that this structure will assist in successfully attaining the rocks and the vision that you set forth in something like EOS. It's just a really great supporting mechanism, and you can leverage all those EOS constructs or scaling up constructs within that revenue enablement organization as well. And actually, it's a really good way to do it.
Right. So does it change the focus? Like obviously EOS has got, vision, all of those things. How are we going to hit these goals? It might be digging into operational, which should really support revenue as well, right? Like it really, I love your point we had in the last conversation we had. You mentioned how really every position in the company should be involved in some level of this idea of that these are our goals around revenue, and how does your position, even if you're a software developer and hate sales, how does your position support that? Is that unfair?
No, let's use that example, right? So, you've got, if you're a software developer, you've got to develop a product that, the customer will use, right? And a feedback loop that you can provide, and that I've seen my clients provide, is especially on the customer experience side, you get some stories, right? Because selling is about telling stories. So what I mean there is the case studies, Mike, right?
Yep.
So the case studies will do that, and then you can communicate that across the organization too, right? So here is Mr. Software or Mrs. Software Developer, here's the importance of what you're doing, right? And here's the impact on the bottom line of the company, and maybe how we can even give you a bonus too, right? So
there you go. Yeah, maybe they can win. And my thought is, I'm not an expert in revenue enablement. I kind of sit in the marketing spot, and I certainly feel like we're good at the parts of marketing that would fit with this model. But that said, my experience is, I guess, leading my business is that everybody really should be aligned on the idea that these are our revenue goals. And if you're not, that's a real problem. Even if you dislike sales, that's probably something you should get over, because we talked about this last time. Sales is the oxygen for a company.
Correct, but I think
you don't sell, you're done. Go ahead.
The CEO has to communicate the overall revenue goals, right, across all the organization, and it's about teamwork too, right? So that teamwork and communication, especially in today's workplace, right? So you've got all the remote or kind of the mixed model too, and it's just people want to know that what they do is valuable, and you can use some of your marketing resources to do that internal communication as well.
Right. Well, you just keep introducing my stuff. I love it. Really quickly,
we didn't even practice that, Mike, did we?
We did go through a little bit of it, but we didn't go through this part. So, all right. So marketing communication support, I want to challenge you to think about marketing that is more than just kind of top of funnel or maybe lead generation or building awareness. My company, what we do when we come in, it's really three situations. One, marketing is just not effective. What we do then is they've tried lots of things. They've been given lots of recommendations, but it's never worked. So we'll go in and build a custom plan to help them overcome those challenges and grow. And that would fit with this revenue generation model. Second area we come in is if it's a B2B company, they've got a great sales process, but they're missing out on deals and they don't know why, and they're not sure what the competition's doing to beat them. We'll go do a research project, talk to the people they're losing deals with, the people they won deals with, and we'll help them improve their sales process to bring in more of those larger deals. Third area is the other one is actually internal communications. It's how do you, it's really kind of what we would call employment brand. And with employment brand, it comes down to, how do you recruit really great employees from a communications perspective? We're not an HR consulting firm, but what's the right story to tell in a job ad so that when they look at your job ad, you stand out? Because we all know right now it's really competitive. And then also, what do you need to be doing internally to retain your best employees? So if those are areas of interest, I've probably talked a little bit too much. We'll move back into our next question, but give us a shout. Next question. I often find when I'm talking to people, one of the things that slows an initiative down is, or maybe adoption for an initiative down, is that they are not sure about, they're unsure about how to approach it, and maybe they're worried about making a mistake. So I thought a great question for Jim today is, what are the mistakes they make when they start these? And so, and then how, maybe how do we get out of those? So again, what mistakes do business leaders make when they're starting off with revenue generation? Jim.
Sure. One of the first things too is, did you have a charter in place? Is there clear goals in mind? And you mentioned EOS or scaling up, right? So those are what they call rocks. But irrespective of what you call, whether it's a rock or goal or objective, you need that charter, right? So what is that charter? So you have a definition of what you want to accomplish, right? So that is revenue, that is people, that may be your technology stack, or all of those together, right? Because you always hear people, process, and systems, right? And that those are important. But so that have that charter, have the definition, right? And then the next one is, do you have the right people to do this, right? I mean, it sounds pretty simple. Do I have the right people in the right seats? And sometimes with these smaller organizations, that you have folks in there that may have been there for a long time, or you may have some relatives in there. I've seen that represents a pretty darn interesting challenge, quite frankly. But I'm not saying run people out. I'm just saying that, let's make sure we've got the right people in the right seats. And what that means is having clear definition of their roles, responsibilities, and accountability. Because if you don't, and without clear definition, and that should be in the charter, a clear definition of the roles, responsibilities, and then what they are accountable for, right? I think we talked about this in our last conversation, is the having the CMO, they really get hit the ejector seat, as opposed to the sales leader. When you don't hit your number, they're gone, right? So but everybody's in this together. So you also have to set some, set the key metrics. What are your, either what do you want to call them, objective and key results, OKRs or KPIs. You want to get those metrics in place. So, for example, the top of funnel, it's your conversion rates, right? For lead to MQL. Sorry, I don't mean to use these acronyms. Leads to marketing qualified leads, to sales qualified leads, to opportunity to close. And in some of these organizations, you want to just land these deals, and then if you land and expand, right? So how are those handoffs between marketing and sales and customer experience? How are they done? That process is very important to be defined, and again, accountability. Who owns what? Like you said, I said land and expand, not land and lose, right? So
absolutely.
So some of those mistakes, and also this does not happen overnight, right? But that's also another reason that the metrics are very important, because you can check progress, right? And it takes a while to get that flywheel going. I mean, Jim Collins talks about that in one of his books, right? The whole flywheel construct. So that's a quick and interesting read in and of itself. So, but again, to have a little bit of patience. It does take a little bit of patience, because typically there will be change involved. And as we all know, people tend to be resistant to change unless you show them why it's working, right? And you can show them why it's working when you have the right metrics and they're doing the right things, right?
Right. So there's almost some internal sales. So you mentioned earlier in your answer to that, like, it's really important to have a charter, and it needs a definition of, like, this is, really, I heard almost even goals. Like, this is the goal of this business initiative of bringing in revenue enablement. Can you give me an example of let's start with what's a bad goal look like? Because I think we all talk about you need a goal, but often we don't have good goals. I know I fall victim to this all the time. I'm going to do this, but I haven't been specific enough, and therefore I don't get it done.
Where I've seen as a bad goal is a misalignment between the CEO and the board and the CRO, right? Or even the CSO is setting unrealistic revenue numbers, right? That's a
Right.
bad goal, right? And you just say, okay, we need to do this, but realistically, you just can't get there, right? You just can't
Hmm.
get there. Or making sure you set, I've got a retention rate that my target is 95%. Well, do you set your baselines such that you can have attainable goals, right? You may have a miserable net promoter score right now, and there's no way you can get to that. So people disengage pretty fast if they realize that goals are unattainable.
Right.
Does,
So
does
tell me
that does
how.
that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, no, that absolutely does.
Okay.
That, because a bad goal, I agree with you completely, is that we often pull goals out of the air. I'm going to do, we're going to hit this revenue. We finished an engagement middle of last year where we did our part and walked away. We didn't really want to kind of continue to engage because it was they had these revenue goals that were 110% impossible, that they would have had to spend so much money to hit these revenue goals that they wouldn't have been profitable, and they would have burned through their entire $30 million worth of investments before they would have hit their revenue goals, because they didn't have a good sales process. They weren't able, their marketing process wasn't efficient enough, and they were not ever going to hit these. They would have been not profitable to try and hit the revenue goals. They really needed to go refine their process, but they had some problems. So if you're watching, you know who I am talking about. My friend that brought me into that company. I'm sorry. So anyways, all right. Setting unrealistic goals. What's the best way to set a realistic goal then? If I'm a CEO, I'm going to bring in a CRO, I'm working with my board, and we all want to have, all of us want to have this great story that we can tell of, we were doing 25 million and 5 years later we were at 75 million, or whatever that is. What's a realistic way for a CEO thinking about this to set that goal?
Well, first of all, you have to analyze your existing business, right? So
Yep.
you have to have the baseline, and some of that might come in your charter. Is like, okay, here's my baseline, here's my goal, right? What is that gap analysis? And then how do I, is that top of funnel? Is that my close rates are way out of whack, right? Or I am, my retention rate is significantly below industry average, right? So if you can identify some of those three key areas, and you'll notice one is in marketing, one is in sales, and one is in customer experience, right? So it's really, you have to take a look at what is your existing business today. Excuse me. What are your your LTV, your long-term value, your average contract value, your sales cycle? You really need to look at that and say, okay, can I increase my business by 20% this year, or 15% this year, 50% this year, right? And also, as you just alluded to, is like, okay, I think I can do it 50%, but how much money do you have to spend to get that top of funnel? Or do you have to expand your sales team by 2x? And if you talk about, or whatever the number is, right, X amount of people, and then you have all your onboarding that you have to be concerned about, right? So, and you have to have the sales support, right? So, and then you have to have the marketing automation in there. So there's there are a lot of moving parts, right? And that's why, again, I advocate for somebody in that CRO seat that has the capability and understanding, both strategically and tactically, to look at all those areas, yet be able to communicate effectively with the CEO, CFO, and board level.
So this just made me think of a lot of times when we go into a company, they really don't have their tech stack down yet. They don't, they know they're growing. They know.
What a surprise.
Right. Well, it's so common. And I don't mean to pick on people, because I honestly, it's rare to be able to kind of go through that process. But if I'm looking at revenue enablement, should I look at my tech stack first and build out that process, or should I you bring somebody in to do revenue enablement, and as a part of that initiative, I'm building the tech stack? What's your perspective on that?
Well, you have to, unless you define your process and your goals, how are you going to define the technology to support that? So, in my opinion, and based on my experience, and even I used to have hair when I started this whole thing, right? So I've learned a couple of lessons, believe it or not, along the way, Mike. But the answer to your question is, I really think you have to look at your overall processes and your overall goals, and then come in with a technology stack to support that.
Right. So when we do this Engage, it's a little bit similar to your answer is we want to go do customer research and build out the right customer journey and then build a tech stack that supports that customer journey. It's not perfect because customers are fickle, but I believe that's a strategic way to approach that problem. You just have to do it with a, grain of salt, I guess, on that customer research because customers do change. And they don't always tell the truth.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother discussion about a tech stack, right? Because
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, no, that's fair. I just the way you brought that up, I just had that question. So thank you. So what are any other top? We have just no, sorry, we're out of time actually. So any other top mistakes before we jump off today?
You got to have a little patience in them, Mr. or Miss CEO.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. You should think of a year. I'm thinking a year of really getting this built. Is that fair?
Yep. And yes, because I mean, yes, it does take time, but there are milestones in a much shorter time frame, like on a monthly, quarterly basis, right? And that's part of your scorecard. That's part of your scorecard too. And then you can celebrate successes because it does work. It does work, and it's sustainable.
All right. We are going to close there. So thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, Mike.
You bet. It's been a pleasure. So next week, I have met Keziah Launchtel, I'm saying her German name again. And she was with us last week talking about alignment. She actually has a fantastic background, did a lot of work in sales enablement, but she has a new position that I have not ever, before I met her, I'd never heard of a fractional chief of staff. And so we're going to bring her in to talk about that and how that fits in with the revenue enablement piece of this. So I hope you guys can make that. That's 10 o'clock next week, and we will see you then.
Thank you all.